both, disseminating information, having conversations with people, and, telling them about what we hear, but also hearing information. So hearing from people, and I do a lot of that, of talking to business owners, talking to people that are with cooperatives and the like.
Take the Fed up on the opportunity to go to those breakfasts and to meet with them, talk with them, get the data, because the data allows you to make decisions not just based upon feeling, but based upon fact.
Absolutely. So it is a structure that was developed over time. So a lot of people, may not know that this is the third iteration at a Federal Reserve Bank for Reserve Bank for the United States. There was two other iterations that actually ended due to congressional mandate. Both of them lasted 20 years each.
Welcome to Southaven Business Beat. Business and community leaders talk with us to provide invaluable resources to aid the business community.
Hey, real quick, before we start, I know most of you listening right now haven't actually hit that subscribe button yet. I get it, you're busy. But it only takes 2 seconds, and it means you'll always have the best business stories and insights from Southaven waiting for you. So go ahead, tap it now. I'll wait. All right, now let's get started on today's episode.
Hello and welcome to another Southaven Business Beat. I'm Aaron Cozort with Wisdom Integrators, and we have a very special interview coming for you today. But before we get into that, like and subscribe. It really helps our channel. It helps grow our presence here in the Mid-South, in Southaven. So if you would do us a favor, go ahead and subscribe to the channel because you won't want to miss interviews like this one. Today we have with us Douglas Scarboro. He is with the Fed here. You're part of the St. Louis Fed, but you're over the Memphis aspect of the St. Louis Fed. Tell me a little bit about your role, about the Fed here in Memphis, and how you got in that role.
Absolutely. Well, thanks a ton for having me. It's always wonderful coming and talking to partners and, organizations that are here in the area. So Douglas Scarboro, Senior Vice President, Regional Executive with the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis and with the Memphis branch. So a lot in that, but you don't have to repeat it as many times as I have to repeat it. Absolutely. And a quick on the way the Federal Reserve works is that we have regional reserve banks. We have 12 that are across the country. We're one of 12. So St. Louis is one of 12. We have 3 branches. The branches are in Little Rock, Louisville, and Memphis. And then I'm over the Memphis branch in the Memphis zone. Memphis zone is 72 counties. Most of the counties actually are in northern Mississippi, but also Western Tennessee and northeastern Arkansas. So it's a good amount of area cover.
Sure.
Diverse economies always here. I'm regularly in the zone. So as a regional executive, that's probably the largest part of my role is the exchange of economic information. So both disseminating information, having conversations with people, and telling them about what we hear, but also hearing information. So hearing from people, and I do a lot of that, of talking to business owners, talking to people that are with cooperatives and the like, and them telling me about, what local conditions look like. What happens with that is that information then goes to our economists that are in St. Louis, and they put that information into the Federal Open Market Committee process, the FOMC process that our president uses. So a lot of people will hear about voting. They'll know a couple of things about the Fed. The FOMC is usually one that they know about the Fed, and the FOMC meets on a regular basis. But what happens is every time they meet, that you have a regional reserve bank president there, and they're talking about things that they heard from their district. So when Alberto Musalem, our president, goes, he's talking about things that happened in the Memphis zone. So conversations I've had with, say, a business owner in Southaven. Will get into his comments and then be able to be part of that deliberation when they go to Washington, D.C. So that way everybody's voice is represented.
Okay. So just a little bit of background about yourself. Tell me how you came to be at the Fed.
So as I was a child, no.
Maybe not quite that far back.
Now, if you would have asked me maybe say 12 years ago, would I be at the Fed? I wouldn't have been opposed to it, but it was not necessarily in my direct career path. I have very educational background, but it's deliberately varied. Where did undergrad in political science, master's in business and healthcare. And then a doctorate degree in actually higher and adult education. Okay. And end up getting to the Fed where my predecessor, Martha Preem Beard, she was one of the people that I would talk to on a regular basis. I was working in city government, then working for the city of Memphis at that time, doing two things. I was chief learning officer, so responsibility for learning and development of about 6,000 employees. And then for the city of Memphis writ large, was responsible for increasing the level of, higher education, post-secondary success and the like, but ultimately increasing the population. As you all know, being here in Southaven, we exist as a metropolitan area and as an MSA. So you want that MSA to grow. So I had a responsibility for that. So in those, dual roles, I would have conversations with my predecessor and, getting information from her, but also giving her information about the Fed. So when it was time for her to retire, we had conversations and ended up with me being here at the Federal Reserve and been here almost 11 years now. And it's been wonderful. The Fed is a truly interesting place.
And it reminds me of the comment that was made by a mentor of mine that it matters more who's in your room, and your future is dictated more by who's in your room than and the people and the conversations you have than it is by the education that you do.
Now that is very true. I've heard as well that it's important who you talk about and who you know, but it's probably more important who they know and when they're talking about you in rooms that you're
That's right. In. Absolutely. Yeah.
At the Southaven Chamber of Commerce, our mission has always been to create more opportunities for our members and community to share their story. And this podcast is just one of many ways that we do just that. But we couldn't make it happen without Pure Focus Media, the creative team behind the scenes helping make us and a lot of local businesses to look and sound their best. Pure Focus Media is on a mission to make high-quality video and content creation accessible to businesses of all sizes. From strategy to production, they help tell your story, attract more leads, and grow through the power of video. If you're ready to level up your brand, you need to visit purefocus.media and schedule your strategy call today.
Let's take a moment and just kind of examine how the Federal Reserve is structured, where Congress falls into it, and just, bring it down to the local understanding level of what do people need to know who are business owners and work every day in Southaven about the structure of the Fed.
Absolutely. So it is a structure that was developed over time. So a lot of people, may not know that this is the third iteration at a Federal Reserve Bank for our Reserve Bank for the United States. There was two other iterations that actually ended due to congressional mandate. Both of them lasted 20 years each, and then there would be another financial scare, and then something would happen, and the same thing happened where there's a financial scare before the creation of the Fed, and with this iteration that's been in existence over 100 years. And what you want to do was to be able to correct for speculation, but also correct for loose monetary policy, how much money is in the economy. So the way that the Fed works is it's a quasi-governmental organization. There's parts of the Federal Reserve that are, government employees. There's part of the Federal Reserve that are non-government employees. Okay. And it's three main parts. And it's interesting because they actually are set up where, the Board of Governors in Washington, D.C., that is mainly employees of federal government employees. Then you have the regional reserve banks. I talked about that a little bit earlier. There's 12 of them that go across the United States. There are, majority of them along the eastern seaboard, and that's just because centers are where American population was. When that was created over 100 years ago in 1913. And then what you saw then as well is centers of American population, centers where people were, centers of commerce. But then also you have unique things. So for all of you all that are doing, Fed trivia, and anybody that is, as much of a Fed nerd as, people that we talk to, there's only one state that has, two regional reserve banks headquartered there, and that's the state of Missouri. So you have St. Louis and you have Kansas City. Right. But then you have the third part, which is actually a mix of both, where you have the non-banking, non-government employees and the government employees. That's the Federal Open Market Committee, and that's the FOMC. They meet 8 times a year, and it's regional reserve bank presidents that sit on there. All 12 are there. They vote on a rotational basis. And then you have governors from the Board of Governors that are on there as well, 17 total individuals that make up. And that was deliberately done so that way they have a dual mandate, or we have a dual mandate for Congress. So to Congress, we have two main things that we're focused on. We have a number of things we do, two main things that we're focused on. That's stable, maximum sustainable employment and stable prices over time. So the maximum sustainable employment is making sure that if you want a job, you can get a job, but then having that be maximized over time. And then for the stable prices over time, literally you think about it. When you go to the store and you're going to buy something, for instance, say you're going to buy soda and, you go in one day and the soda is at one price and then you go the next day and the soda is 30% more. I don't think a lot of people want to see that soda be 30% more the next day. So stable prices over time is due to quality. You want to, you do see increase in pricing over time, but you don't want to see, our aim dramatic. And our target. You don't want to see dramatic. Our target is 2%. So you want to see 2% growth over time.
So in your role, what does your day-to-day look like?
I get this question, and I always try to think about like the best way to answer it. So no day looks alike, but it is always a mix of, that, like I was talking about earlier, that exchange of information. So sometimes I'm having conversations with people. Sometimes I'm listening and, getting a lot of information, but it's usually a mix of the like. So, most recently, they had a conversation and had a engagement with the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, the Birmingham branch. So Memphis has a branch, Birmingham has a branch. We did a joint board meeting. So we had our individuals that sit on our board. We have 6 people on our board, and they represent an area of individuals that come from diverse industries, but also from throughout that Memphis zone, the 72 county area I talked about. And they went and they met with Birmingham, and we had a meeting and we exchanged economic information. As you can imagine, it makes for a really good conversation, because what happens is that you have, people, multiple industries. So you have, for instance, our board chair who runs the Cotton Collaborative down in Greenwood, Mississippi, to, with their board chair who is with a soda bottler there in Birmingham. Very different, different areas, different industries, but we ask them similar questions and you get very interesting insights into the economy.
That leads me into, a bit of a discussion that hopefully you can give us a little bit of insight on, because the Fed is really data driven. You're going to see that term tossed around if you watch much news about the Fed and being data driven. So as you're gathering that data, how does local data play into the decisions and the advice and the feedback that those governors are giving up to Washington? Absolutely.
Well, it comes in with the governors because they do a good bit of traveling, but the presidents, like I said, every Federal Open Market Committee meeting, every FOMC, they're bringing information that comes directly from their area. And the way that it goes is, I think about, data in 2 different main ways. There's a lot of, different ways you can slice data, a lot of different ways you can look at it. And anecdotal data. So we look at anecdotal data and we look at statistical data, just like I said, just really large areas. And anecdotal data usually is point in time looking forward. Okay. Statistical data usually is point in time because it's based upon numbers. You have to gather the numbers and get that information and make sure those numbers are good and rigorous. And I know people have had some frustration recently because the numbers change and then they say, yes, we gave you a number, but then we got an even better number. Right. So we updated that number. Those are usually point in time and looking backwards. Right. The anecdotal becomes extremely important because we're talking to business owners. We're talking to people like you and saying, what is it that you see that's going to happen in an economy 6 months from now? What is it, when you look at employment, when you look at, investments, when you look at your capital expenditures, what is it going to look like? Well, as we sit here today, it looks one way. And, as we look at, late winter, early spring, 2026, I come talk to you 6 months from now, we're into the summer, start to get into the fall, it may look wholly different. Correct. So that is, the anecdotal data is always extremely important, is for us to be able to have a look into the future. And that's why it's vital for us to have, boards. I mentioned a board, we have industry councils on 4 different areas. I run one that's on transportation. We also have ones that look at agribusiness, that look at real estate, and also look at healthcare. We have conversations with them. And what happens is the more conversations that you're having with a more diverse population of people from all across the district, from different industries, you get really rich information. As you can imagine, a healthcare provider is going to have a different conversation with me at this point in the economy than somebody that's running a transportation firm.
Absolutely.
But we take all that information, we're able to bring it in, and you're able to compare that with the anecdotal, with the statistical, and you can get a good picture, or you get a much better and more informed and more, to your point, more data dependent look at the economy.
Now, when you say statistical data, where does that data derive from? Is it partners that collect that data? Is it businesses that supply that data? How does that data arrive at the Fed?
It's a good question. So yes, researchers make use of government data. They make use of some pre-collected data that's non-government data. They also make use of data that they collect as well. So it's a number of different sources to get to that statistical information. It depends upon what they're looking at. For instance, I know that, say, our research director, Carlos Garriga, he's looked at housing prices over time, and he's, pulled information about housing prices. And he had a paper that was a little bit ago where he looked at housing prices and looked, when they had all the conversation about the Amazon headquarters. Mm-hmm. And when they were looking at, it was a good study because you can look and you had communities across the United States that were competing for that.
Right.
And when they were competing for that, you can look at the impact of, which community actually went to, and then how housing and prices were affected then. Well, he's going to look at, a number of different sources in order to pull and gather that data. It's going to be based upon what he's looking for. So we get it from a number of different places.
So while we're on data, thinking through this, what are a few pieces of data that you quite often realize you have and the Memphis Fed and the St. Louis Fed have that business owners should be paying attention to, but maybe they don't realize you have it? Like, what are some of those conversations where people go, "Well, I didn't know you all had data on that." Maybe walk us through a little bit of those conversations you have.
Well, it's two, and actually, it's two pieces of data that we gather. If there's, if they don't take anything else from this conversation, there's two places I would tell them to always, go and look. One is, if they don't know that we have, one is FRED, it's Federal Reserve Economic Data. And that's, run out of the St. Louis Fed. And it's a host of resources there that are statistical. That's mainly statistical in nature. So if they're interested, they can go in and say, for DeSoto County, Mississippi, and they want to know what DeSoto County, Mississippi unemployment looks like. Literally, they can go in, type, that in just as a simple search, and they'll pull up not only graphs on that, but also graphs on correlated things as well.
Okay.
But you also have the Beige Book. So that is anecdotal in nature. So we have all these conversations that I mentioned earlier, the ones that, I'm going out and I'm talking to a number of different people. So we have all those conversations. But then what we do with that is always the data is kept anonymous. So, for instance, if I was, talking to you, I would say a business owner in Mississippi said, and then that information is put into the Beige Book. And that Beige Book then gives you insight into, what's happening in a particular area, in a particular district. For the St. Louis district, you'll see information. Usually it'll be, sectioned out into different areas. And now those are two wonderful resources that people aren't, I always try to make sure when I'm having conversations with groups or giving a presentation, if it's 2 points that, they didn't know that we had, or the data that they are interested in what the Fed is looking at. If you look at FRED and look at Beige Book, you'll be able to get a really good sense of what's happening.
All right. We're going to take just a moment and thank our sponsors, and then we're going to come back and we're going to continue this conversation. We've got some great questions to ask in just a moment, but we want to take a moment and thank our sponsors.
At the Southaven Chamber of Commerce, our mission has always been to bring more opportunities to our members and to our community, and this podcast is one of the many ways that we do just that. But we couldn't be able to do what we do without the support of our sponsor, Wisdom Integrators. They're the strategic tech partner that makes it possible for businesses to work smarter and not harder. Wisdom Integrators helps organizations harness that power of technology by designing tailored solutions for workflow, automation, process improvement, and digital transformation. For small businesses or large enterprises, they bridge the gap between the vision and the execution. Are you ready to scale up your efficiency and impact? Then you need to come and visit wisdomintegrators.com. to schedule your consultation today.
Thank you for continuing with us, and we really appreciate our sponsors that help make this podcast possible. As we continue this conversation, what are some of the key themes? We were just talking about the Beige Book. Mm-hmm. What are some of the key themes that you're seeing in that anecdotal data we've been talking about?
Absolutely, and the most recent one we've seen, is cautious optimism, where there's been a lot of change that's happening in the economy, and there is some concern. And so you've seen, continue and kind of increase in purchases, but you've seen cautious in purchases. I would say that more than increase. And you've seen that especially, say, for instance, with automobiles. A larger ticket item is not something that, most people is, durable goods. So it's going to last, more than a year. It's not something that people are going to purchase on a regular basis. You've seen cautious in larger purchases like that. But you have seen a kind of an overall cautious optimism in the economy as a number of factors have come into play, not only nationwide, worldwide, but specifically here in the Mid-South.
So when you say cautious optimism, what you're saying is people's perspective is they think things are headed in the right direction, but they're maybe a little heavier in holding on to cash or reserves right now, simply because they want the flexibility to move with where the changes in the economy are headed. Is that really, am I getting the idea?
So you've seen a moderate increase in prices, and because you've seen that moderate increase in prices, you see consumers start to adjust to those increases in prices over time. So with that, you do have people that are, both thinking about the individual consumer, but then also you think about the business as well. We're seeing an uptick in, say, producer price index. You see, one of the things I look at and that I think about is large scale producers, are they buying? Right. And you start to see them starting to buy more now. But then you look at large scale prices. I talked about automobiles earlier, home prices as well, or home purchases. So the home prices have continued to rise some. And what you see is home purchases, consumers are starting to slow down some. So with producers and them starting to increase, what you see is there is some optimism. There is some thought pattern. Okay, I'm not going to buy raw materials that are going to be, made into something I'm going to sell somebody 6 months, 12 months down the line. Right. I'm not going to have an increase in what I'm buying unless I think that there is a likelihood that the consumer is going to buy it. And then what you're seeing from consumer is, all right, prices have still started to go up. Right. My money may not be going up as quickly as the prices are. So let me be, mindful about what I'm buying, especially if it's a large purchase like a house.
Sure. So one of the themes that is certainly true in my world of technology and imagine is in yours is AI. So there's a recent article out from you concerning AI and healthcare. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. Healthcare has been something I've been, interested in for a while, and, talked about degrees, did a degree in healthcare, and rationale and thought pattern about it was, healthcare is the largest employer in the United States. You go and you talk to almost any community I'm in. When I look at who's the largest employer, usually it's going to be that large health system or the collaboration or a collection of other healthcare providers as well. With that, you can't have a conversation there. Every conference I go to, somebody's mentioning artificial intelligence, mentioning AI. Obviously, we have a lot of activity here in the Mid-South with AI and with data centers. So it makes sense that with the proliferation of AI, with healthcare being a large employer, that you would see, combination between the two. What we've seen early on is, and we'll have, a number of sessions with this, is that there's been slower or less adoption. I won't say slower. There's been less adoption in rural communities as opposed to urban communities. Okay. When you look at rural communities, you've seen about 18% of those systems have had, a pickup of AI use in healthcare. Whereas you look at urban areas and you see about 44% pickup. And there's been, $6 billion spent on, artificial intelligence as you're looking at healthcare over the last year or so, last year in 2025. And what you see is that a lot more use is happening, and that now people are starting to look and say, okay, what's the payoff? Where am I going to see for the expenditure I made? Where I'm going to see that come out in revenue? Just starting to happen. Well, I'm sure we'll see more of it, from everything of, from reading film and, from a radiologist being able to have artificial intelligence go in, make predictions there to, even use of, doctors and some of their notes. Absolutely. So we're seeing a number of use cases, not only for in the practice, but then also overall in the use of the hospital administration. And I think people are, very adaptable to it and very are becoming more, I won't say very, they're becoming more accepting of its use and just trying to find what's the best use case? What is a way that I can implement this and actually help my business?
So in those conversations that you're having, how many of those conversations are seeming to come from like a fear perspective on the job side versus how many are saying, listen, this will alleviate so much of our minutia that our people can start doing more valuable things that have a higher impact. So thinking especially from healthcare, a higher impact on patient care.
What we've seen is the benefit is to make the current workers better. There was a concern very early on of, what's going to happen with jobs. Right. And it's making current workers better. Ones that, have, for instance, you're just looking at capacity and you're looking, you're saying, okay, I want to understand how to say I have a patient population of 700. I want to make sure that, their length of stay is maximized with them staying in the hospital only the amount of time they actually need to be there. Well, now you can use AI to be able to run a number of analysis to say, okay, here's things that you can do. Here's, times that you can bring people in. Here's, procedures that you can do in order to be able to decrease that length of stay, but also increase that overall outcome for the patient.
Absolutely. So as we, kind of head towards wrapping up, what are some events that maybe the community in Southaven needs to know about that you all are involved in?
Absolutely. So one, we do on a regular basis. So we have talked about FOMC. When there's a meeting sequence. We have board meetings that, happen before the FOMC and it's part of our preparation process. With that, we always have an economist that comes usually comes in from St. Louis. And when we do that, we have what's called a breakfast with the Fed. Okay. And that breakfast with the Fed is a series. We deliberately hold it, around the district. We'll hold it at our branch in downtown Memphis, but then we have, the upcoming one that we're going to do that will be at the branch, but then we'll have ones later on this year that will be in Germantown and be, in different areas. Love to come have one here in Southaven. The thing that happens in those is for, not only people that are business owners and the like and chamber members and like, but, just anybody that's in the economy that's interested in a particular topic. The economist is going to have, research that they're going to present on. Okay. And when they come, so for instance, the next one we'll have, one of our regional economists, Chuck Gaskin, and he'll come in and he'll, give us a regional economic briefing. Okay. So specific to Memphis, specific to our area, he's going to say, okay, here are the things that are working well in your economy. Here's the things that, you may see some challenges. Here's some things. Here's, overall outlook as well for, what I'm seeing when I look at the regional economy specific to the Memphis zone, that 72 county area. So you can find out, information about not only the breakfasts with the Fed, but also, a number of other events. I mentioned the AI in healthcare. We're going to have a series where we come and we talk about that with the researcher coming into the community to actually, have sessions on that. But you can go look at stlouisfed.org and be able to go and, go to the Memphis page and you'll see all of our events there.
That'd be great. So as we kind of wrap up, how do places like the Southaven Chamber of Commerce interact with your office, with the Fed at large to deliver more information, better information, and more access to that information to the local business owners?
Absolutely. So, fortunately, you have a Memphis branch that's literally, 20, 30 minutes away. So you're always welcome having events to, be able to come in and gather and get that information that we're presenting. We are always coming to the community. I look forward to coming back. And I know we talked about having a series to come back and have a conversation here. the thing that we always, push on and want to make sure people know is that our vision is a strong, resilient economy for all.
Right.
That doesn't happen without us having, all of the work we do, but having this, as we have talked about, this conversation with business owners about what they're seeing in the economy, presentations from us from a research standpoint about what we're seeing in the economy. So that way we're able to get the best picture. That's why it's worked for over 100 years. That's why, you hear conversation about, why do you need a region? Why do you need a reserve bank? Why do you need an independent reserve bank? Mm-hmm. And it's because, this ability to come understand what's happening in the economy, for us to be able to have data that we've looked at to present an economy, to present to people that are in the economy. And that way it gives the best picture and ultimately helps us to be able to meet that dual mandate that we talked about earlier of maximum sustainable employment and stable prices over time.
Well, thank you so much for being here, and I just want to say to our viewers, if your imagination of what the Fed does revolves solely around what is the interest rate right now in the economy, clearly by watching this, you've understood that there's a whole lot more to what the Federal Reserve does, especially what the St. Louis Federal Reserve does, the Reserve Bank, and what impact it has in our local economy, but also the representation, the listening to the voices that are actually in the economy doing the real work. So encourage you to take the Fed up on the opportunity to go to those breakfasts and to meet with them, talk with them, get the data, because the data allows you to make decisions not just based upon feeling, but based upon fact. And always, just like the conversation started, it's not just who you know, it's what you know. And those two things together power your ability to function in the economy, in Southaven, as we grow Mississippi together. Thank you for watching another episode of Southaven Business Beat. I'm Aaron Cozort. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Southaven Business Beat. Would you like to be a sponsor of Southaven Business Beat? Please email us, info@southavenchamber.com. Be sure to share and subscribe for more business resources.